My guests today on Bridges are Andrea Thompson and Sean Day, and today's topic is all about radical transformation. Hello and welcome to Bridges Today. I'm Monica Schmelter. I'm glad that you could join us. My guest today is Andrea Thompson, and she's going to share with us a little bit about her story and a book that she's recently written. Andrea, so good to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Well, it's good to have you, and I'd like for us to start with, I know your book is Jesus Girl Doing Real Life. I'd like us to start with a little bit about your story, because as I understand it, you've been through some pretty painful things, some abusive situations, but God has really delivered you. So let's hear a little bit about your story.
Okay, thanks. Yes, you know, my life has not been a picture book perfect story, and it started really at the age of 12 when my uncle's attempt of rape had failed. 2 years after that, though I wasn't so lucky, I was actually gang raped by 6 guys. And one of the guys there was
Did you know the guys?
I knew one of them, and who was a so-called friend of mine. But even he, you know, didn't help. He just watched, he laughed. So went through this horrific situation in rape. Throughout that, you know, it just began a spiraling down journey into horrible choices and compromises that I had made in my life. By the time I was 17, I was 100 pounds overweight. I felt unloved. I was confused. I didn't know what my place was in the world. And then at the ripe old age of 18, I became a stripper. And that was my way and means of life on and off for 10 years.
Yeah. And really what you're describing, Andrea, is so much abuse and really catastrophic events. At 12, for there to be an attempted rape by your uncle, and then to be gang raped by 6 people, and somebody that you regarded as a friend to watch and to laugh. Were you raised in a Christian home? Did you have anybody you felt like, Andrea, that you could go talk to and say, I've been gang raped, this has happened, or was it something that you kept a secret?
Well, I wasn't raised in a Christian home. I'm actually Jewish, but when I was 8 years old, my parents had gone to church with some friends of theirs that introduced us to a Christian church. And that's where I first learned about Jesus. But the thing was that I knew Jesus in my head, but I didn't know him in my heart. Right. I didn't have that relationship. And so even though I knew about him and was interested in him, and back then, you know, my dad was very hard on me. I mean, if the A's weren't A pluses, I remember when being at my heavy point, you know, he would say that, you know, if you were skinny, even a gunny sack would look good on you. So there was no one to talk to. And in fact, when I came home that horrible night, he thought I had been out doing, you know, things that I shouldn't have been, even though I was in places I shouldn't have been, but I couldn't tell anybody. So I held on to that pain and that hurt and those secrets for so many years of my life.
And I know a lot of times when we hold stuff in, it shows up in different ways in our lives, even though we don't realize that's what's happening. But so you say you have all of these catastrophic events, and you kind of compromise in one area and another, and at 18, you become a stripper.
Yes.
And I don't think anyone mostly would grow up and say, you know, when I grow up, I want to become a stripper. But that had to present some challenges in and of itself, just to do that for a living.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like you just said, you know, I did not wake up one day and aspire to be a stripper, but I was looking for my self-worth. I was looking for identity. I was wanting to be loved, and I wasn't getting that from my dad, and I needed that, and I didn't have that relationship yet with Jesus Christ, so I was filling that void. And you know, I learned about love at that time was a very distorted way. And so I didn't understand what true love was. So I would, you know, literally became so desensitized to everything around me and what I was doing to just be able to survive, to be able to, you know, to make it however that looked for me. But along with those horrible things and keeping those secrets inside, I mean, I was dying inside. And I know so many people that, you know, go through that and feel that way, that they're alone and there's nobody there. And so you just begin to become enslaved to this bondage lack of self-worth and not knowing who you are, to pretending to be something that you're not. And I went through that, not just, and that shaped me for even in my first marriage that I had that ended after 18 years. And it was just this constant battle of trying to figure out who I was, but I was always being compared to somebody else. So in my marriage, I was always being compared to other women, and it was the other strippers, and so I thought,
So you were still stripping after you became a married woman?
Yes, yes. I started.
Your husband was okay with that?
He pushed me into that. And so, you get caught up in that enslavement where it was, you need to work, you need to do something. And so all the while I was at the club, he was at another club. So here I am making, all of this money to support my family, even after I had my first child. But I was so dehumanized and so desensitized to what life truly was and what love was, that I thought that I was doing the right thing for my family and for my husband at the time.
So you felt like that's what you needed to do, and you're earning a living, and the Bible talks about that when we give place to sin, that our hearts really become callous, that our conscience becomes seared. And I think that's part of what you're talking about. You were doing the best you could, but you had to become numb to it in order to continue to do it.
Yes.
And you really experienced that emotional abuse of being compared to other women and being forced to live this lifestyle. And one of the things that I noticed about the cover of your book is that the tagline said that you went from stripper to preacher. So how did you get out of that lifestyle?
Well, Monica, I always tell people that I was always meant for this stage. I just needed to get to the right one.
You're on the wrong one for sure, yeah.
And there was a time after my marriage had ended, I became involved with a man really quickly after that for 3 years. And that really became the lowest part of my life, believe it or not. And I was contemplating suicide. I mean, I had destruction set right next to me that I talk about in my book. But there was this man, he had a young son that lived with his ex-wife. And I got to know the ex-wife. And I'm telling you, only God does these things. But I wound up befriending the ex-wife. And it was one night that I talk about in the book where I was on the edge of destruction, and I called her. I had nobody else to call. And I called her, and she talked with me for hours that night and really just saved me from, committing that suicide. And,
Amen.
And so I had nowhere to go, and I knew I had to leave. I had my daughter with me. My son had moved out. He was so angry and, just hated me for what I was doing and things that were happening. But my daughter stuck with me, and I packed up my stuff, and I got a phone call, and I wound up moving in, my daughter and I, with my now ex-boyfriend's ex-wife's parents' house. I mean, who does that? Nothing is impossible with God.
Amen.
And for 2 years of my life, I lived there, and God stripped me of everything, the men, the material things, the thoughts, everything. And I just completely honed in on who this Jesus was. And in that process, I met my mentor, Pastor Barry Young. And he gave me 5 steps. They were not necessarily easy steps, but they were simple steps.
A place to start, something that you could do, because what you're really describing is a life that was just in total disrepair for so many reasons.
Oh, absolutely.
So God delivers you from that and places you in an unlikely home, but a place of refuge. Yes. And then you meet the mentor pastor. And what is the first of the 5 steps? What is it?
Okay, so the first of the 5 steps is walking daily with God.
Amen.
I mean, that's number 1. And then it's don't settle, it's get stable. When you can leave or make that change and get the trash out.
Amen.
And those 5 steps just led me in a direction. In fact, I carry those 5 steps with me in my wallet every day.
Amen.
To remind me of, where I was. And we all struggle. We all have things that, we need to be freed from, because Galatians 5:1 says that Christ came to set us free.
Amen.
And to give us a free life. And so I take those steps and I outline them in my book, how I went through them in my life, but also how they're so relevant to anybody, anywhere.
Yeah, everything you just said. It wouldn't matter if you were in a stripper's lifestyle or just gambling addiction or just a dysfunctional person in some other ways, but everybody thinks we've got it all together. Anybody could employ those 5 steps. One of the things I saw that you shared in your book is that a lot of times we get ourselves into big situations because of small compromises along the way. I'm thinking of your point, don't settle. A lot of times we just settle.
Right, absolutely. I mean, I talk about how the little compromises turned into bigger compromise, and it's that slow fade. You know, it's like, I'll just do this. You know, for me, it started out with, I'm just gonna be pushed in and go do a bikini contest. It's okay. And then from there, it was like, well, you know, you're beautiful and you need to, you know, and so it was just those process of totally separating myself from really what God had for me and turning to what the world said. And it was a slow fade, but on the other hand, it was being so conformed to the patterns of the world.
Absolutely.
And it was those 2 years in the basement that God transformed me. And I stick to Romans 12:2 of not being conformed to the world, but being transformed by the renewing of my mind. And I could only do that by walking daily with God and in my quiet time and seeking Him and who He is and who He created me to be.
Yeah. Well, and for anybody, that's the only way, is to walk daily with God.
Yes.
To renew our mind, because our world will suck us into whatever it is.
Absolutely.
And you know, you certainly had some catastrophic things that led you a particular way, but for all of us, there is that challenge, there's that temptation, there's that thing that comes up. Instead of honoring God, you know, we'll just tell that little lie. We'll just don't do that. We'll just let that go. And we don't realize at that small compromise that there's going to be a consequence, that our conscience is going to be seared, and we're going to go deeper. But what you're saying is that having that 2-year reprieve of being in the basement
Absolutely.
and the 5 steps took you from a lifestyle of stripping and compromise to a place where now you're sharing Jesus with people.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so amazing, and it's such a blessing and an honor. You know, when God was bringing me out of the darkest pits of destruction, I remember walking and saying that, you know, Lord, you have blessed me, and now I am going to be a blessing. And Lord, use me however that is. And that's my mission now, is to bring hope to the hopeless and to let people know they're not alone. They're not enslaved. And however that looks, whether that's just within their own selves or their own minds, whether that's in their home life, whether that's, you know, people that are being human trafficked. Whatever that is, I want to be able to bring that hope and possibility that says, you know what, no matter where you've been, no matter where you are, no matter what you've done or what has been done to you, God has a plan and a purpose for you, and it's so big and it's so grand. And if we just give Him that opportunity, you know, He will change, just like He, I mean.
He did it for you.
He did it for me.
He'll do it for others. Thank you for coming today, Andrea,
Thank
for
you.
sharing. It's been good to have you. What she's saying really is God did it for her, and He can do it for all of us as we trust Him. We've got to go. We'll be right back in just a moment.
You can purchase a copy of today's show for $15. Call us at 615-754-0039 or send a check to the address on the screen. Please mention the program number on the screen.
Join the Bridges community on Facebook. Visit Facebook and search for Bridges with Monica. We would love to connect with you.
If you're just joining us today on Bridges, you're going to get an opportunity to meet Sean Day. Sean Day was addicted to drugs, had been in prison several times. While in prison, he found Jesus. Here's his story of radical transformation.
Well, I grew up in Cleveland. My mother raised me. I had an older brother. My mom worked at the post office. We lived in the inner city, but she was trying to create a better life for us. My grandmother also raised me. She was a Christian. She'd always have me kneel at the foot of her bed at night, and we'd recite the Lord's Prayer together. I can remember that from the age of 5 years old. My father was in and out of our lives. One of the first memories I have of him is one Christmas Eve, he took me to a bar right on the corner, and we shared a beer together. And I remember falling asleep on top of the bar and waking up at my grandmother's house the next day. and I thought that was fun.
Tell me about the first time that you did drugs.
Well, my father introduced me to cocaine when I was 12. He told me that if I could condition my mind to supersede the properties of cocaine, that I would never be its slave or anybody else's. So for 27 years, I worked on that problem. So that led me to homelessness, prisons, treatment centers, near-death experiences. I got conditioned to zigzag from the bullets of drug dealers and run from stores and jump off of buildings and try to creep into small crevices of houses in order to feed my addiction. Cocaine became my God.
Tell me about the first time you went to prison.
Well, it was 1995. I was standing on the corner of Kinsman Avenue, which is in Cleveland, Ohio, and I was purchasing a crack cocaine. And the police saw the transaction and took me to jail. I never did get treatment that first time. They sent me directly to prison. I did 8 months and 14 days. And the first day I got out, I was right back on the street corner trying to find some drugs.
Prison became a cycle for Sean. He was sentenced 5 different times. Among his charges were 35 petty thefts. In 2010, Sean was sentenced again. He says he wanted the conviction to be his last.
By dusk of that evening, the weight of my present fate swept over me like a typhoon. So I started sweating, nausea, feverish. The walls started shrinking in around me. It came to a point where I decided that I wouldn't see another prison dawn, and I fell to my knees and I started moaning. These long, vibrating moans that were filled with more sorrow than any words I've ever expressed. I started crying. I stayed on my knees there for hours. And this voice reminded me of my past transgressions, one by one, as if I were being judged on Judgment Day. I remember standing up from that kneeling position and walking over to the mirror for what I built up in me to be the very last time. I looked into a pair of eyes that I didn't even recognize. They were the eyes of a man who had just given up hope. From the corner of my eye, I saw the third shift corrections officer shadow precede him from beneath the cell door. I told myself that all he wants is a paycheck anyway, and he doesn't care about us inmates, and how stupid he's gonna feel when he comes back and finds me dead on this floor. The voice told me that I should ram my head into the wall, that I should run with all my might and in my life. I decided to try it. So I walked over to the furthest corner of the room. I knelt down to the ground in a runner's stance, and then a light shined in my face. "What is it, inmate?" It was the guard. "Officer," I said, "Hey man, I don't know what's going on, but I don't think I'm gonna make it through the night. Could you let me out of the cell just for a little while? I can mop the floors, I'll clean the staff bathroom, I'll do anything, just get me out of here." So the officer shined his light around the cell, and he said, "You know, it's been my experience that only Jesus can set you free. That what's going on the outside of this cell is not more important than what can go on the inside of you. And with that, he walked away. But his words lingered on in the air, and they sent a chill down my spine, and they began to envelop me. And I heard this voice say, just call out to Jesus. Just call on him. And so I fell to my knees and I started crying, Jesus, Lord, this can't be it. This cannot be my final destination. Please, God, help me. Please, Lord. Make me new, Lord, please. I said those words until my voice failed me. I cried and cried and cried. But I made it through the night. My mother had sent a Bible to me in the county jail prior to me being transferred to Lorraine Correctional Institution. And I started reading that Bible. And I started reading about Jesus. And I started reading about how he'd heal the leper or the blind man and bring people from the dead. And I decided that if I put myself in their place, then Jesus could heal me too. A crackhead, alcoholic, he could heal me. And he could change my life.
So you would serve the full 3.5 years in prison.
Yeah, at first, those 3.5 years seemed like a punishment, but they became a time of restoration. I knew that 27 years worth of filth wasn't gonna wash off easy.
Sean, why do you think that God restored everything in your life?
Well, I think that 27-year period before God delivered me was only to increase the knowledge and the sympathy in me for those who I'd ministered to now. When I was at the end of myself and my shame had become too large for my body, I guess I had to come to the end of my life to meet the Creator of life. I had to humble myself to the point where I no longer could stand who I was in order to find Christ. And I'm thankful, I'm grateful for that moment. I'm ecstatic.
I am too. And so while you're preparing yourself for your future, it's my understanding that you met a special woman.
Well, I was transferred to Marion Correctional Institution, and I started, I was in the ministry, the Christian ministry, and I was singing in the choir, and I was asked to be in the plays. They produced plays for the community to come in, and the Christian gentlemen put on great productions. This one particular play, I was playing Jesus, and as the crowd disperses, they get to come and shake the hands of the cast. And this one young lady, she didn't come up, but she gave me a thumbs up. And so I waved and she left. But come to find out, she wrote letters to all the inmates in the play, congratulating them on behalf of her church for being Christians and helping others try to find Christ. But she wrote a special letter in my note saying how passionate she thought I was portraying the character I had portrayed. And so I wrote her back thanking her for that, and I told her how God had changed my life inside that prison cell a few months prior. And so she wrote me back, and I wrote her back, and we started calling each other on the phone, and then she started visiting me. And the next thing you know, I was released, and we're now married. Yeah.
That's amazing.
It is.
What about Jesus appealed to you, Sean?
The miracles of Jesus appeal to me now as well as then more than anything. The idea of change, of being something of utter menace, of utter destruction, and turning that something into something that I could characterize as a flower or something beautiful, it appealed to me. And I wanted to be that flower. I wanted to change from a nothing to something, from non-important to the importance of sharing what Christ can do, not only for me, but for anybody.
So, the whole time before your prison sentence, did you ever think change was possible?
No, I thought I'd always be a crackhead. I thought I'd always be stealing from stores. I never, ever, ever anticipated on coming to Christ, on being in the position that I am now. I never thought I'd be married. I never thought I'd have a family that loved me. As it stands, I've regained my communication with my sons. So not only, God just restored everything in my life.
So, if there was one thing you'd want people to know about you, what would that be?
I was the most horrible person on the planet. My sinful nature led me to do anything and everything I could to obtain crack cocaine. Today, I have my family. I'm a whole new creature. I'd like people to know that if we give ourselves to Christ, wholeheartedly, that He will change us. He will reach in and use our torn pieces and turn them into a place of faith and turn them into His glory.
Well, Sean Day has an amazing story of radical transformation, and he tells that story in his autobiography, Carry Your Cross. I know today as you've watched Bridges, you've been blessed by hearing Sean's story of transformation and also Andrea Thompson's. And we want you to know that as you trust Christ and lean on Him and obey Him, He will bring whatever transformation you need inside of your life. We've got to go, but we say goodbye and God bless you.
Do you have a ministry or business? You can contact Nashville's WHTN for studio and programming rates. Visit ctntv.org/studio or call 615-754-0039 for more details.
The blood of Christ is the only cure. It gets down to the root of every single thing that ails us. There's not an addiction, there's not a generational curse, there's not any root of sin, there's nothing that the blood of Jesus cannot cleanse.
Visit monicaschmelter.com to schedule Monica to speak at your event.
Prayer changes things. If you need prayer, write to the address on the screen. Call 615-754-0039 or email prayer@ctntv.org.
Log on to www.ctntv.org, where you can make a prayer request, view our program guide, see who's on Bridges, or even watch one of Monica's latest teachings. Log on to www.ctntv.org.